Sarah Bennett chopped vegetables in silence, while junior officers made jokes about her demotion. No one realized the woman dicing carrots had eliminated an entire enemy cell single-handedly 6 months prior. When Admiral Carson finally connected her face to the classified after-action reports, he knocked over his coffee and immediately locked his office door. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Sarah Bennett chopped vegetables in silence, while junior officers made jokes about her demotion. No one realized the woman dicing carrots had eliminated an entire enemy cell single-handedly 6 months prior. When Admiral Carson finally connected her face to the classified after-action reports, he knocked over his coffee and immediately locked his office door. The industrial steel prep counter in Camp Lejeune's officer mess hall bore the rhythmic tap of her knife at precisely 0600 hours on a cold November morning, 3 weeks into an assignment that had become her prison and her penance in equal measure. Sarah Bennett stood at her station, with dark hair pulled tight in a regulation bun that revealed the sharp angles of her face. Her medium build concealed beneath kitchen whites that smelled of industrial cleaner and the morning's first batch of scrambled eggs for 2,000 hungry Marines. Her hands moved with mechanical efficiency as each carrot slice fell away at exactly 3 millimeters thick, the blade kissing the cutting board with a consistency that would have impressed a surgeon or alarmed anyone who understood that this kind of precision came from muscle memory trained for entirely different kinds of cutting. Behind her, Lieutenant Brad Morrison and Lieutenant Kevin Torres stood near the coffee station in their crisp uniforms, their voices carrying across the prep area with the casual cruelty of men who had never faced real consequences. Morrison was 28 and built like he spent more time in the gym than the field. An academy graduate whose confidence outpaced his experience by several years and countless lives. "Can you imagine?" he said to Torres, his voice pitched just loud enough to ensure Sarah could hear. "Kitchen duty. Bet she couldn't handle real pressure. Academy washout, probably." Torres laughed, a sharp bark that echoed off the stainless steel surfaces. 26 years old and cocky in the way that only untested officers could be. He added his own assessment with the certainty of someone who had never watched his team die around him. She probably cried during her first field exercise. Sarah's knife never paused in its steady rhythm. Her eyes remained focused on the vegetables before her, though every word landed with the precision of incoming fire. She had arrived at 0530, as she did every morning, would prep until 1400, clean until 1700, and return to barracks where sleep came in fitful bursts between the hours when her mind replayed every decision that had led her to this moment. Mess Sergeant Holland appeared at her elbow, a stocky man of 55 whose kind eyes had seen his own share of combat back when he was cooking for Special Forces teams in hostile territory. "You're overqualified for potato duty, Bennett," he said quietly, and she replied without looking up that every duty matters, Sergeant. The words were true even if they tasted like ash in her mouth. Steam rose from industrial dishwashers behind her, the smell of cooking oil mingling with disinfectant, and through it all, Sarah's eyes constantly scanned exits and assessed sight lines, her body positioned with her back to the wall because 8 years of operations had trained reflexes that 3 weeks of kitchen duty could not erase. 8 miles across base, Admiral James Carson sat in his office at 0800, reviewing routine personnel transfers with the resigned attention of a man who had signed 10,000 such documents over 35 years of distinguished service. His gray hair was cut to regulation length, and his uniform bore the weight of campaigns from Afghanistan to classified operations he would never discuss with anyone lacking the appropriate clearance. He was signing off on kitchen staff reassignments when Sarah Bennett's name appeared on his screen, flagged with a notation that made him pause. His hand reached for his coffee as he clicked through to her file, expecting perhaps a medical issue or a routine background check update. Instead, the screen flashed red. Classified. JSOC. Access. Only. His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Why would kitchen staff need Joint Special Operations Command clearance? Carson had maintained his special operations credentials throughout his career, despite moving into conventional command structures, a legacy of his early days running counter-terrorism task forces. He used those credentials now, his fingers moving across the keyboard, with the careful deliberation of a man who understood he was about to learn something that would complicate his day considerably. The file opened. His coffee cup jerked and brown liquid splashed across his desk blotter as his eyes tracked across the screen. He stood abruptly, walked to his office door, locked it, and returned to his desk with the intensity of a man who had just discovered a live grenade in his filing cabinet. Operation Phantom Sweep, Afghanistan-Pakistan border. 6 months prior. The mission summary unfolded like a horror film played in reverse. Team of 6 JSOC operators deployed to eliminate high-value target cell planning coordinated attack on U.S. Embassy in Kabul. Asset betrayal. Ambush. 5 killed in action. 1 survivor. That survivor had spent 72 hours alone behind enemy lines and had systematically eliminated 12 enemy operatives, including the entire HVT cell leadership. Mission objective achieved. Casualty rate 83%. The file continued. Confirmed kills. 47 over 8-year operational career. Specializations, counter-terrorism, high-value target elimination. Solo deep penetration operations. Commendations. Silver Star. 3 Bronze Stars with Valor. Purple Heart. Call sign. Scalpel. Current status. Administrative reassignment pending investigation. Do not deploy. Carson's hands trembled slightly as he paged through her complete operational history. She had been recruited from Army intelligence at 24, her psych profile noting an unusual capacity for operational compartmentalization and decision-making under extreme stress. The assessment read like poetry written by people who had never felt the weight of those decisions. Subject demonstrates exceptional capability for solo operations with minimal support. Recommended for advanced training. Her career unfolded in classified reports from Karachi in 2019, where she had provided overwatch for a hostage rescue that saved 4 aid workers, Mogadishu in 2021, where her intelligence work had prevented a hotel bombing, Caracas in 2022, where the details remained so heavily redacted that even his clearance level showed only black bars and the notation Operation Successful. Then came Operation Phantom Sweep. Carson read the after-action report 3 times. The team had been betrayed by a local asset they had trusted, led into a kill zone in the mountains, where enemy fighters had surrounded them on 3 sides with heavy weapons and numerical superiority. The firefight had lasted 7 minutes. 5 operators had died, buying time for Sarah to break contact and disappear into the mountains with nothing but her rifle, sidearm, and the knowledge that 12 terrorists were planning to kill hundreds of civilians. She had hunted them for 3 days. The report detailed each elimination with clinical precision. Sniper shot at 847 meters. Close quarters engagement in safe house. Improvised explosive device at vehicle checkpoint. The pattern showed a methodical dismantling of an entire terrorist cell by a single operator working without support, communications, or extraction plan. The investigation notes made Carson's jaw clench. Pending inquiry into decision-making during Operation Phantom Sweep. Allegations of exceeding rules of engagement. Possible violations of operational protocols. He understood immediately what he was reading. This was not an investigation into failure, but into success that made politicians nervous. In an election year, the Department of Defense wanted no controversial operators visible, no complicated stories about women who killed terrorists to save lives because someone in Washington was afraid of how the optics would play on cable news. It was easier to hide her in a kitchen than explain why 5 good men had died while she survived and completed the mission. Carson's own son had been a Marine lieutenant killed 2 years ago in Syria during an operation that went wrong because of bad intelligence and worse luck. He understood impossible choices. He understood that sometimes the only way to honor the dead was to finish what they started. Sarah Bennett had brought 5 bodies home and stopped an embassy bombing. The fact that she was now peeling potatoes while being investigated for succeeding too well made something cold and angry settle in his chest. He spent the morning reading every file, every operation, every after-action report. When he finally looked up, it was past noon, and he understood exactly who Sarah Bennett was. The most dangerous person on his base, and possibly the most valuable. She was also being buried alive by bureaucrats who would never understand what it meant to make the choices she had made. Across base, Sarah continued her routine with the grinding consistency of someone who understood that survival sometimes meant enduring rather than fighting. Lunch rush brought the usual chaos as junior officers lined up for mediocre food and better gossip. She watched Morrison and Torres brief their teams for an upcoming joint training exercise with foreign allies, her trained eye catching security gaps in their planning that would get people killed in actual operations, but which would pass muster in the controlled environment of war games. She said nothing. Her position did not invite commentary. She had learned in 3 weeks that silence was armor and anonymity was survival. Corporal Jenna Martinez appeared at the serving line, a supply clerk of 24, whose friendly face had not yet learned the hard edges that came with real deployment. She was the only person on base who treated Sarah like a human being rather than a curiosity or a failure. "Hey, Bennett," she said with genuine warmth. "We're putting together a base softball team. You should join us." Sarah declined politely, citing her schedule. But Martinez's kindness stayed with her through the afternoon, like a small light in a dark room. That evening in the barracks, Sarah performed maintenance on her hidden kit with the ritualistic care of a priest tending sacred objects. The false bottom of her locker contained her combat knife, an encrypted phone that received occasional messages from her handler, Colonel Price, and enough emergency cash to disappear if the investigation went badly. These were the tools of her former life. Kept sharp because instinct demanded readiness, even when orders demanded stillness. She still ran night reconnaissance around the base perimeter from 0300 to 0500 every morning, her body moving through the darkness while other Marines slept, maintaining skills and conditioning because the alternative was letting herself grow soft and helpless. Her phone buzzed at 2200 hours. Colonel Price's voice carried the flat effect of someone reading from a script. "Stay invisible, Bennett. The board review is in 2 weeks. Don't give them reasons to bury you permanently." She acknowledged the instruction and ended the call, then sat on her rack staring at the ceiling. She had not exceeded rules of engagement. She had done what was necessary. 5 families had their sons' bodies home because of her choices. 12 terrorists would never bomb an embassy or kill civilians. She would make the same choice again if required, though she hoped to never be required. At 0200, she woke from dreams she would not examine in daylight, and did not try to return to sleep, because the ghosts that visited those hours were poor company for rest. The next morning, Admiral Carson made 2 phone calls on a secure line. The first was to General Patricia Hawthorne, an old friend who had moved into Pentagon liaison roles where politics mattered more than tactics. "Patricia," he said, "I need to know about Sarah Bennett." The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds, which in military communication might as well have been 3 hours. The line crackled before Hawthorne's voice returned with the careful neutrality of someone choosing words in a minefield. "She's the best we've ever produced, Jim. She's also a liability if the wrong people spin her story. Keep her buried until this blows over. Our recommendation is permanent reassignment to training command or intelligence analysis. Somewhere she can't become a headline." Carson absorbed this, his jaw working as he processed the subtext. "How long?" Hawthorne sighed, a sound like wind through empty rooms. 6 months minimum, maybe longer. You know how these things work. The investigation is cover for keeping her invisible. She's too good and too controversial. We need her, but we can't use her. So we park her in a kitchen and hope everyone forgets. He thanked her for her honesty and made his decision. He would meet Sarah Bennett himself, assess what kind of operator Washington was so afraid of that they would waste her talents on vegetable prep. He arranged a random inspection of mess hall facilities for that afternoon, the kind of spot check that admirals occasionally performed to maintain the fiction that senior leadership cared about the details. Sarah was at her station when Sergeant Holland suddenly barked everyone to attention at 1,430 hours. Admiral Carson walked through the kitchen with the measured pace of someone conducting a genuine inspection, his eyes taking in equipment and cleanliness and the professional demeanor of the staff. But his focus, Sarah understood immediately, was on her. He stopped at her station, his eyes dropping to the perfectly uniform vegetable slices arranged in metal containers. "Sergeant Bennett," he said, "your knife work is precise." She met his gaze directly without fear or deference, beyond what rank required. "Thank you, sir. Consistency matters." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "How long have you been in kitchen duty?" 3 weeks, sir." "And before?" "Various assignments, sir." The lie was smooth and rehearsed, and utterly transparent to anyone who knew where to look. Carson saw what others missed. The way she had positioned herself with clear view of all entrances. The way her hand had moved fractionally toward her knife when he approached before training reasserted control, the absolute stillness of someone who knew how to become invisible when necessary. As he left, he said, "Carry on. Sergeant, your service is appreciated." 4 words that contained more meaning than the rest of the conversation combined. After he had gone, Morrison muttered to Torres that even the Admiral was doing pity inspections now, and both men laughed at their own cleverness, never understanding they had just witnessed the moment when everything was about to change. Carson returned to his office and wrote a confidential memo requesting Sarah Bennett's operational status for advisory purposes only. Careful wording that would give him access without triggering oversight protocols. His assistant knocked and entered with an urgent intelligence brief marked "Immediate attention required." He read it twice. Credible threat to base from domestic extremist cell. Timeline: 72 hours. Target: unclear but assessed as high-value personnel or symbolic attack on military installation. He stared at Sarah Bennett's file on his desk, then at the threat assessment, and felt the pieces clicking into place with the inevitability of an operation reaching its critical moment. He had 3 days to stop an attack on his base. He had conventional security forces who were competent but predictable, and he had a ghost in his kitchen who had hunted and eliminated an entire terrorist cell alone in hostile mountains. The wheels began turning in his mind, strategy forming. Because Admiral James Carson had not survived 35 years in the military by ignoring the assets available to him, even when those assets came with political complications and a body count that made bureaucrats nervous. At 0700 hours the following morning, Admiral Carson convened an emergency classified briefing in the secure conference room on the 2nd floor of base headquarters, where thick walls and electronic countermeasures ensured that conversations stayed within carefully controlled boundaries. Commander Rachel Stone arrived first. A woman of 42 with sharp features and 15 years of military police and base security experience that showed in the way she carried herself with coiled readiness. Major David Park followed. The intelligence officer whose analytical mind had earned him a reputation for seeing patterns others missed. Though his talents ran toward conventional threat assessment rather than the kind of asymmetric warfare that kept Carson awake at night, the Admiral laid out the situation with brutal efficiency. A domestic extremist group calling themselves the Free Patriots Militia had been planning an attack on Camp Lejeune. Designed to expose what they termed government tyranny, their communications intercepted by an FBI joint task force that had been monitoring right-wing extremist cells across the southeastern United States for the past 18 months. The target was specific and symbolic. The officers' mess hall during Friday evening's formal dinner, 48 hours away, when senior leadership would be gathered in dress uniforms for what should have been a routine ceremonial event. The method involved suspected insider assistance, someone on base who had been feeding information about security protocols and building layouts and the movements of high-value personnel. Commander Stone had already elevated security protocols, But Carson could see the frustration in her eyes as she processed the magnitude of the challenge. Camp Lejeune housed 47,000 Marines, civilians and contractors, spread across 156,000 acres, and finding one or more traitors in that population was like searching for specific grains of sand on a beach that stretched to the horizon. Stone's team was good, professional, trained in conventional security doctrine that worked beautifully against conventional threats. But these extremists had been planning for months, had inside help, and were motivated by ideology that made them unpredictable and dangerous in ways that standard protocols struggled to address. Carson made his decision in that moment, a choice that would either save lives or end his career, depending on how the next 72 hours unfolded. He needed an unconventional approach, someone who understood asymmetric warfare and could think like the enemy, because she had been the enemy's nightmare in a dozen operations across 3 continents. He needed to bring Sarah Bennett into this briefing as a consultant. Political consequences be damned. At 1,100 hours, Sarah received a summons to the Admiral's office, delivered by a young corporal whose nervous demeanor suggested he understood he was interrupting something he did not fully comprehend. The junior officers noticed immediately. Morrison looked up from his coffee and said to Torres that she was probably finally getting discharged. "Good riddance," his voice carrying the casual dismissal of someone who had never understood that competence could hide in unexpected places. Sarah walked across base to headquarters with every step measured, her tactical awareness engaged in ways it had not been during 3 weeks of kitchen anonymity. She was being recalled to the world she had left, pulled back into the machinery of violence and decision-making that had defined her adult life, until bureaucrats decided her effectiveness was politically inconvenient. The headquarters building rose before her, concrete and glass reflecting morning sun, and she felt the familiar weight settling across her shoulders, like armor she had tried to remove but which had never truly left. Petty Officer Williams looked nervous when Sarah arrived at the outer office, his youth obvious in the way his eyes darted between her kitchen whites and the Admiral's closed door. "The Admiral is expecting you." "Sergeant," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he knew this was irregular, but lacked the context to understand exactly how irregular. Carson's office was sparse and functional, the desk covered with files and intelligence reports that he swept aside as Sarah entered. He was direct in the way that senior officers could be when time mattered more than protocol. "I know who you are," he said without preamble. "I know what you've done. I know why you're in that kitchen. Right now, I don't care about politics. I care about the 3,000 people on this base who are going to be at that dinner in 48 hours. He briefed her on the threat with classified intelligence reports spread across his desk, photographs of known militia members, intercepted communications that spelled out intent, if not specific methodology. His request was simple and impossible. He needed her eyes, needed her to look at their security plan and tell him what they were missing. Sarah was silent for 3 seconds, her mind processing the implications of involvement, while her instincts already catalogued the threat parameters. "Sir, with respect, I'm under investigation. My involvement could compromise any prosecution, could give defense attorneys grounds for dismissal, could hand my enemies in Washington exactly the ammunition they need to bury me permanently." Carson cut through her objection like a blade through tissue. "I'm not asking Sergeant Bennett, the kitchen worker. I'm asking Scalpel." The call sign hit her like incoming fire, a name she had not heard spoken aloud in 3 weeks. And something shifted in her posture as 8 years of operational identity reasserted itself over the careful anonymity she had constructed. Her conditions were non-negotiable. "This stays off record. I consult only. I don't exist in any official capacity." Carson agreed immediately because he understood that sometimes victory required bending rules until they screamed. She studied his security plan for 10 minutes in complete silence, while he watched her face transform from passive kitchen worker to tactical analyst. When she spoke, her voice carried the cold professional tone of an operator delivering an after-action assessment. "You have 4 critical vulnerabilities, 2 of which will get people killed. Your perimeter is focused on vehicle approach, but they'll come on foot through the marsh on the east side, where surveillance is weakest and terrain provides concealment. Your surveillance gaps occur during shift changes at 1,000, 830 and 2,000. 130, and they'll exploit the latter when darkness provides additional cover. You're assuming frontal assault, but they'll position a fire team on the water tower for overwatch and send their penetration team through the laundry facility, where civilian contractor access creates a natural weakness in your security architecture. And you're looking for one insider, but there are at least two, probably three, because complex operations require redundancy and compartmentalization. Carson was visibly shaken, his coffee cup forgotten on his desk. "How can you possibly know these things?" Sarah's response was simple and devastating. "Because it's what I would do, sir. And I've done it 17 times across 8 years of operations against targets who thought their security was adequate until it wasn't." She made her requests with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she needed. Access to personnel files for everyone, with security protocol access, mess hall schedules, and building schematics, plus freedom to move across base without questions or oversight. Carson authorized it immediately, assigning her temporary clearance under the false pretense of a facility security audit. Bureaucratic cover that would hold until someone looked too closely. Sarah began systematic analysis, but she didn't work from an office because offices provided only data when what she needed was context and human behavior patterns that revealed themselves through observation. She spent the next hours moving through base operations, watching personnel with eyes trained to identify anomalies in routine behavior. At the mess hall during off hours, she traced potential breach points and found fresh marks on the laundry facility window frame where someone had tested the access within the past week. Security footage analysis revealed 3 individuals who had lingered near vulnerable points with frequency that exceeded coincidence. Corporal Mike Daniels from Supply, Specialist Rebecca Hayes from IT, and civilian contractor Jim Patterson from Maintenance. Daniels appeared clean at first examination, his record unremarkable in its adequacy. But Hayes had an unexplained $15,000 deposit in her personal account 2 months prior. And Patterson's brother had documented connections to militia movements in North Carolina. At 1,800 hours, she reported her findings to Carson. Her assessment delivered with the precision of someone who understood that hunches backed by data became actionable intelligence. The decision point was obvious and painful. They couldn't arrest without proof, because doing so would tip off the external cell, and they would simply postpone rather than cancel, moving their operation to another base or another target, where Carson would have no warning and no operator who could see their patterns. Sarah's recommendation was tactically sound and morally complicated. We let it play out. We fortify the actual vulnerabilities without being obvious about our knowledge. We watch the suspects, and when they move, we take them all at once. Inside and outside threats simultaneously. Carson struggled with her plan because it meant using his people as bait, placing officers in potential danger to achieve complete victory rather than partial disruption. Sarah's logic was cold and undeniable. If we shut this down now, they'll just hit another base, another time, possibly with better operational security, because they'll know we detected them. We end this here permanently. Or we accept that we're just delaying inevitable violence. He authorized her plan with one condition. She was advisor only. Commander Stone's team would handle tactical execution. Sarah nodded her agreement, but both of them understood the unspoken truth that if the situation deteriorated, she would act regardless of orders or official capacity, because that was what operators did when civilians were at risk. The next 24 hours unfolded as covert preparation, disguised as enhanced security protocols that could be explained as routine readiness exercises. Sarah worked with Stone's team, who believed she was some Pentagon security consultant brought in for the formal dinner, their lack of context serving as operational security. Stone was competent and professional, trained in conventional doctrine that Sarah subtly redirected through suggestions framed as recommendations rather than orders. Sarah personally inspected the mess hall, and identified optimal defensive positions, noting which junior officers would become liabilities in actual combat. Morrison was on that list, his confidence untested by real fire. A personal moment came when Jenna Martinez discovered Sarah in tactical gear during preparation. Her confusion obvious in the way her smile faltered. "Bennett? I thought you were in kitchen duty." Sarah's response was clipped and urgent. "Not now, Martinez. Stay clear of the officers' mess tomorrow evening. Actually, volunteer for overnight duty somewhere else, anywhere else." Jenna was smart enough to recognize serious threat without requiring detailed explanation, trusted Sarah enough to agree immediately. That evening, in temporary quarters, where Carson had moved her away from barracks observation, Sarah performed maintenance on personal weapons for the first time in 3 weeks. Her combat knife felt familiar and dangerous in her hands. Her Sig Sauer P-226, which she wasn't officially supposed to possess during administrative reassignment, had been maintained in secret throughout her kitchen exile. Her tactical mind engaged fully for the first time since Operation Phantom Sweep, and she felt herself coming alive in ways that chopping vegetables had never allowed. This life had cost her everything, 5 teammates and her career and her peace. But it was the only life she knew how to live with complete authenticity. Friday morning arrived at 0530 hours, with Sarah having abandoned any pretense of sleep, her eyes tracking surveillance feeds through the night as the base woke to what most personnel believed was routine day. Officers prepared for formal dinner with the mild dread of mandatory ceremonial events. Morrison and Torres dressed in their uniforms while joking about boring speeches and rubber chicken, their ignorance a shield that Sarah almost envied. She positioned herself in an observation post, an empty office overlooking approach routes, where she sat in borrowed tactical gear that made her officially invisible. At 0800 hours, Specialist Hayes called in sick, and Sarah immediately notified Carson. "She's clearing herself out. It's confirmed." Throughout the day, Sarah tracked Patterson's movements through security cameras, watching him check his phone with frequency that betrayed nervousness. At 1400 hours, external FBI surveillance reported 3 vehicles entering the area near base, their occupants matching known militia member profiles. At 1600 hours, Carson wanted to call everything off, his nerve failing as theoretical planning became imminent reality. Sarah argued with cold certainty. "We have them, all of them, right where we want them. Trust the plan, sir." At 1630 hours, Corporal Daniels, the suspect Sarah had assessed as clean, suddenly requested emergency leave, and she realized her error with sick clarity. "He's the third insider. We missed him because he was too clean, too unremarkable." Stone's team scrambled to adjust, redirecting surveillance to Daniels while maintaining coverage on other threats. At 1800 hours, the formal dinner began with senior leadership and officers in dress uniforms filling the mess hall that Sarah had analyzed for vulnerabilities. Carson stood near the podium, sweating despite aggressive air conditioning, his awareness that everything could explode into violence at any moment, showing in the tension around his eyes. Sarah settled into overwatch position, communications earpiece connecting her to tactical net, her voice calm and professional as she keyed the microphone. "All stations, this is Scalpel. Eyes sharp. They'll hit during speeches when everyone's distracted and exits are blocked." At 1915 hours, Admiral Carson stood at the podium, delivering remarks about service and sacrifice, with irony so profound it would have been funny if people weren't about to die. Sarah spotted the first movement, Patterson detaching from maintenance area toward laundry facility, his earpiece visible for just a moment as he turned his head. Her voice cut across tactical net with surgical precision. "Alpha Team, insider moving to entry point. Beta Team, prepare for external breach." Simultaneously, 4 militia members moved through East Marsh exactly as she had predicted. Night vision equipment visible in infrared, suppressed weapons ready for close quarters work. Commander Stone's voice carried confusion and dawning realization. "How did you know they would come this way?" Sarah had no time for explanations. Not now. East perimeter. 200 meters from fence line, 4 hostiles armed with AR-15 platforms, moving to breach. Stone's team moved to intercept, but Sarah saw what they missed because she was looking for it. The 5th man on the water tower, in sniper position watching the responders deploy, his rifle tracking targets below. She made her decision without requesting authorization, exiting her observation post and moving fast toward the water tower, while her voice continued coordination. 5th, hostile, elevated position. Water tower, threat to response teams. At the laundry facility, Patterson opened the door for 2 more militia members who had infiltrated earlier and been hiding in civilian contractor areas. Carson saw security teams moving through mess hall windows, realized the attack was happening in real time, and tried to keep his speech normal to avoid panic that would create chaos and casualties. Morrison noticed movement outside and whispered to Torres, asking what was going on, his face showing the first recognition that something was badly wrong. First shots erupted at the east fence, where militia team engaged Stone's perimeter Marines. Suppressed fire that sounded like sharp coughs in the evening air. The Marines returned fire immediately because training overcame surprise, their discipline apparent in controlled bursts rather than panic spraying. Chaos began inside the mess hall as junior officers instinctively moved toward the sound of combat. Morrison tried to lead response, finally getting the action he had imagined in training scenarios. But Torres grabbed his arm and stopped him with brutal honesty. "Those are real bullets, Brad. This isn't training." Sarah reached the water tower base and looked up at 40 feet of steel ladder leading to the sniper, who was adjusting his position to fire on Marines below. Her internal calculation was instantaneous. 40-foot climb. Hostile has high ground and superior position. Maybe 30 seconds before he kills someone who trusts that their security is adequate. She started climbing with her knife between her teeth and pistol holstered, muscle memory taking over as her hands found rungs without conscious thought. The operator was back, rising through darkness toward a man who had no idea that death was climbing toward him, with the patient inevitability of a scalpel moving toward infected tissue. Sarah climbed the water tower in darkness, with each handhold deliberate and silent as death itself, her body moving with the controlled precision of someone who had scaled compound walls in Karachi and observation posts in Mogadishu, where a single sound meant mission failure and probable death. The sniper above her was Travis Reed, 34 years old and militia tactical leader whose military experience had been limited to 3 years in the National Guard before dishonorable discharge, and he was focused entirely on the chaos below where Marines engaged his team at the fence line. He did not hear her until she was 4 feet away, and by then it was far too late for him to matter. She vaulted the railing with explosive speed, closing the distance before he could swing his rifle around, and her combat knife drove into his shoulder in a non-lethal strike calculated to incapacitate without killing, because she understood that dead men could not provide intelligence, and living prisoners created legal complications that served her purposes better than corpses. She disarms him in 1.8 seconds, the rifle clattering against steel grating as her knee drove into his kidney and her free hand secured his weapon. Her voice was cold and professional when she asked how many hostiles were inside. He spat at her with the defiance of a true believer, and she applied pressure to his shoulder wound with clinical efficiency until pain broke through ideology. 3, he gasped. Patterson's opening the kitchen entrance. She zip-tied him with plastic cuffs from her tactical vest, took his radio, and heard militia communications crackling with urgent coordination. Nest, we're breached and heading to target. 30 seconds. Sarah keyed her own tactical comm and spoke with absolute clarity. All stations, 3 hostiles entering through kitchen service entrance. I'm moving to intercept. Do not repeat. Do not let them reach the mess hall. Commander Stone's voice cut back with confusion and command authority. Negative, unknown call sign, maintain position. But Admiral Carson's voice overrode her with 5 words that changed everything. Let her work. Commander, trust me. Sarah descended the tower in what could only be described as a controlled fall, her hands barely touching rungs as gravity and training combined to deliver her to ground level in seconds rather than minutes. She sprinted toward the kitchen entrance across ground she had walked 1,000 times in 3 weeks of exile. Every obstacle and sightline memorized through repetition that had seemed meaningless until this exact moment. She entered through the maintenance door and saw 3 militia members moving through the darkened kitchen toward mess hall doors 200 feet away, where dozens of officers sat in dress uniforms, completely unaware that death was approaching with rifles and ideology, and the willingness to die for a cause that made sense only to those who had abandoned reason for rage. Sarah was alone, and they were armed with AR-15 rifles and body armor that made center mass shots problematic at best. They were 60 seconds from killing Admiral Carson and Morrison and Torres and every other officer who had dismissed her as a kitchen failure. Her tactical assessment was instantaneous. She could not shoot because she was not authorized to use deadly force as a consultant, and her suppressed pistol would not penetrate their armor at distance anyway. Her decision was immediate and terrifying. She went loud. Sarah killed the lights in the kitchen section, using circuit breaker knowledge accumulated through weeks of preparation and cleaning, and learning every system in this building that had become her prison and her eventual battlefield. The space plunged into absolute darkness, and the militia team panicked immediately because their night vision equipment was still stowed in assault packs, and darkness transformed their advantage into liability. She heard their voices over comms calling to each other. Doug and Marcus and Tommy. Names that would appear in after-action reports and court documents. Sarah moved through the kitchen like water flowing around obstacles, this terrain as familiar to her now as any operations theater she had infiltrated across 8 years. Every prep station and counter and refrigerator and storage rack was mapped in her mind with the precision of someone who had spent 3 weeks learning ground that everyone else dismissed as mundane. First contact came when she took Doug from behind, using wire stripped from an industrial mixer. The garrote applied in a non-lethal chokehold that JSOC had taught her in a classified facility, where instructors emphasized that unconscious enemies provided more intelligence than dead ones. He dropped in 7 seconds, and she secured his weapon, slinging it across her back as she moved to the next target. Marcus panicked and fired a burst from his AR-15, the muzzle flash illuminating his position as bullets tore through an industrial refrigerator that Sarah had been standing behind 0.3 seconds earlier. The sound was catastrophic and immediate, alerting everyone in the mess hall that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Officers moved to lockdown protocols with training, overriding the shock of realizing their formal dinner had become a combat zone. Morrison finally found himself in a real combat situation and froze completely when gunfire erupted close by, his academy training evaporating under the weight of actual incoming fire. Torres pulled him down to the floor with brutal practicality. "Stay down. Let security handle it." Inside the kitchen, Sarah used Marcus's muzzle flash to locate him precisely. Her hand finding the prep knife she had used for 3 weeks to dice vegetables, and she threw it with the accuracy of someone who understood ballistics and trajectory. The knife struck his weapon's magazine release, and his AR jammed at exactly the wrong moment. She closed distance with explosive speed, disarming him with Krav Maga techniques that turned his own momentum against him, rendering him unconscious with a strike to the carotid artery that shut down blood flow to his brain for the critical seconds necessary to end the fight. Tommy was smarter than his companions and had moved to a defensive position where he held a hostage that made Sarah's tactical situation infinitely more complicated. Specialist Hayes, the insider who was supposed to be sick but had come back to witness their victory, now found herself with a rifle pressed to her head and a militant screaming threats into the darkness. "Back off or I drop her," Tommy shouted. And Sarah stepped into the pale emergency lighting with her hands visible and her voice carrying the authority of 47 lives. "You don't want to do this," she said. And Tommy's response revealed his complete misunderstanding of the situation. "Who the hell are you? You're just kitchen staff." Sarah's response was simple and devastating. "No, I'm really not." Her voice carried 8 years of operational experience and the weight of decisions that had saved hundreds of lives at the cost of dozens. In that split second, Hayes realized exactly who Sarah was and dropped her weight with trained response that came from basic combat training, and Sarah's pistol cleared her holster with mechanical efficiency. She fired twice, both rounds striking Tommy's exposed shoulder and thigh in non-lethal zones calculated to incapacitate without killing. He dropped, and the entire engagement had lasted 90 seconds, from lights out to last hostile down. Simultaneously, outside the kitchen, Commander Stone's Marines were engaged with the four-man militia team at the east fence in a firefight that was brutal but professional. The Marines had superior training and discipline, while the militia had fanaticism and willingness to die, a combination that made for intense but ultimately one-sided combat. 2 militia members went down wounded, and 1 attempted to escape back toward the marsh. Stone coordinated her teams with professional efficiency. Box him in. Watch for secondary threats. The explosion that followed sent shockwaves across the fence line as the escaping militant detonated a suicide vest among the trees, killing only himself but sending a message about the zealotry they were facing. The pinned militant surrendered while screaming about government tyranny and constitutional rights, his ideology intact even as his operation collapsed. Stone secured the perimeter and assessed casualties. 3 Marines with minor injuries, 5 militia members down or captured, insider threats contained. She reported to Carson with professional satisfaction. "Perimeter secure, sir." Then static crackled, and Sarah's voice came through. "Kitchen secure, 3 hostiles down, non-lethal, insider Hayes in custody." Stone's confusion was obvious in her voice. "Who the hell is that?" Carson's response carried satisfaction and vindication. "That, Commander, is why we win." Base lockdown protocols activated completely as FBI tactical teams flooded in and military police secured all prisoners. The timeline would show that the entire attack had lasted 23 minutes from first shot to all clear, and there were 0 civilian or officer casualties because Sarah's plan had worked with surgical precision. At 2,130 hours, the mess hall was cleared and senior leadership emerged safe, while officers tried to process how close they had come to dying during what should have been a boring ceremonial dinner. Morrison and Torres came out of lockdown with adrenaline crashing through their systems and the terrible realization that real combat was nothing like training scenarios. Commander Stone demanded answers from Admiral Carson with barely controlled frustration. Who was that in the kitchen? That wasn't standard protocol. That was something else entirely. Carson made his decision in that moment that truth was necessary and politically dangerous and absolutely required. He called Sarah to the command center where senior staff had gathered, and she walked in still wearing tactical gear with a small amount of blood on her sleeve that was not hers. She looked every inch the operator she was, and the room fell silent as many officers recognized her as that kitchen worker they had dismissed and ignored. Carson addressed the room with formal precision. "Gentlemen, ladies, let me properly introduce Sergeant Sarah Bennett, former JSOC operator, call sign Scalpel, 47 confirmed kills over 8-year career, currently on administrative reassignment, and as of tonight, the reason Camp Lejeune still has living commanding officers." The stunned silence was broken by Stone. "The kitchen worker is a what, exactly?" Sarah's response was measured. "Sir, I'm currently under investigation for exceeding rules of engagement during Operation Phantom Sweep." Morrison looked like he might vomit as he processed that he had spent 3 weeks mocking one of the most lethal operators in U.S. military history. Carson continued his explanation. "Sergeant Bennett identified our security vulnerabilities, pinpointed our insider threats, and personally neutralized 3 armed hostiles using non-lethal force to avoid legal complications for this command. She did this while officially being just a consultant, because her service record is politically inconvenient." Major Park asked the question everyone was thinking. "Non-lethal? She took down 3 armed militants in a dark kitchen?" Sarah's answer carried the weight of every decision she had ever made. "They're alive, sir. Injured but alive. I know the difference." That statement landed with devastating impact, because everyone understood she could have killed them easily, but had chosen not to, even at greater risk to herself. The FBI debriefed everyone over the next 6 hours as the militia network was rolled up with 11 total arrests, including Hayes and Patterson and Daniels, who had been caught trying to flee base. Domestic terrorism charges would follow for the entire cell, and Sarah gave a detailed after-action report accounting for every movement and decision. The challenge was that she had used deadly skills in non-deadly ways and had technically violated her consultant role, creating a legally gray area that would require careful navigation. At dawn on Saturday at 0630 hours, Carson sat in his office with Sarah, and both were exhausted but functional. He was direct as always. "I'm writing this up. Full report. Your actions saved lives. The board review can't ignore this." Sarah's response revealed her concerns. "Sir, with respect, this might make my situation worse. I violated the terms of my reassignment." Carson's answer was emphatic. "You followed my direct orders. I'll make that clear. But Sarah," and the use of her first name was significant, "you can't live in that kitchen. You're an operator. You need to operate." She was silent for a long time before responding. "Operation Phantom Sweep. I made the right call. I know I did. But 5 good men died because our intelligence was bad. I carry that." Carson's response cut to the heart of the matter. "You carry it by living, by being ready when needed. Like tonight." He made calls to General Hawthorne and JSOC Command and the DoD Inspector General, with a simple message: Bennett saved lives tonight. The investigation is political theater. End it. Meanwhile, the base woke to sanitized news of an attempted attack thwarted by security forces. The official story scrubbed clean of uncomfortable details. Junior officers were learning who Sarah really was, and Morrison approached her in a hallway, barely able to look her in the eye. "Sergeant Bennett, everything I said." Sarah's response was gracious. "You didn't know, Lieutenant, and I was good at not being known." Morrison managed to say, "Still, I'm sorry. For what it's worth. Thank you." She nodded and accepted it and moved on because holding grudges was a luxury operators could not afford. 1 week later, Sarah was still officially in kitchen duty, but everyone knew the truth now, and treatment had changed to respect, mixed with fear and always distance, because she was marked as fundamentally different from everyone around her. Jenna Martinez still treated her normally. "So, you're like a secret assassin or something?" Sarah's answer was honest. "I was a soldier. I did what soldiers do." Jenna's response made Sarah smile for the first time in months. "You're still playing in that softball game, right? We need a good arm." On day 8, Sarah was summoned to Carson's office again for official notification. The DoD Inspector General had closed the investigation and ruled Operation Phantom Sweep actions justified under extreme circumstances. All charges dropped, commendation added to file, full reinstatement offered. Options were presented, including return to JSOC operational status, training command position, or intelligence division. Carson's recommendation was clear. Take the training position. Pass on what you know. You've proven you can still operate, but you don't have to anymore. Sarah considered her situation carefully. She was 32 years old, had seen enough darkness for 3 lifetimes, carried 47 souls in her ledger. Her decision came after genuine reflection. Training command. At least for a year. See if I can teach what I've learned without the cost. Carson nodded with approval. The teams need someone who's been there. Someone who understands the weight. Effective immediately, Sergeant Sarah Bennett was promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned to Special Operations Training Group. She left his office and walked across base one last time as a kitchen worker, stopping at the mess hall where Sergeant Holland was prepping lunch. "Heard you're leaving us," he said. "Gonna miss that knife work." Sarah's gratitude was genuine. "Sergeant, thank you for treating me normally when no one else did." Holland's response revealed his wisdom. "That's because normal is what you needed, not what you were." 6 months later, at the MARSOC training facility in North Carolina, Master Sergeant Sarah Bennett was running advanced close-quarters combat courses for JSOC candidates, with a reputation for being harder on them than anyone because she knew the reality they would face. Students called her the Ghost after her kitchen anonymity became legend, and she was demonstrating room clearing to a class of 20 operators in training with brutal honesty about costs. Every target is a person. Every person is someone's son or daughter, or brother or sister. You remember that not to hesitate, but to understand the weight you'll carry. I have 47 names I can recite from memory. You'll have yours. Make sure each one was necessary. Admiral Carson visited the facility to inspect training programs and watched her teach from the observation deck, seeing that she had found her place, still sharp and still deadly, but building instead of destroying. Their conversation in the hallway was brief. "How's the transition?" Sarah answered honestly. "Harder than I expected, easier than I feared. These kids remind me why it matters." Carson's response affirmed her choice. "Good. We need teachers who've lived it. The next Operation Phantom Sweep won't have happy endings unless we prepare them right." Sarah's final word on the subject revealed her philosophy. "No operation has a happy ending, sir. Just necessary ones." That evening, in her office, reviewing candidate files with red pen marking assessment notes, her phone rang with an unknown number, and Colonel Price's voice came through. "Scalpel, how's retirement treating you?" Sarah's correction was immediate. "I'm not retired. I'm teaching." Price's response suggested why he was calling. "Good, because we have a situation developing. Mali, high-value target, 3-person team, needs someone with your specific skill set to advise mission planning." Sarah looked at the candidate files on her desk and thought about the weight and the cost and the necessity before responding. "Send me the brief, but Price, I consult only. My operating days are done." Price acknowledged. "Understood. The brief's encrypted. Incoming now." She hung up and opened her laptop as the encrypted file downloaded. Operation Sandstorm. Classified. She read it, and her tactical mind engaged automatically, seeing patterns and vulnerabilities and solutions as she whispered to herself. "Once a scalpel," but she didn't finish the phrase because she was no longer just cutting, she was healing too. The final image was her looking at a candidate photo of a young female operator in training who reminded her of herself 12 years ago, before the 47 and before Operation Phantom Sweep and before the kitchen, and she made a note on the file. "Candidate shows exceptional promise. Recommend advanced assessment." She was paying it forward, teaching the next generation to carry the weight she knew so well, her silhouette against the window showing an operator who became a teacher, still sharp and still ready but choosing when to cut.